Welcome, everybody, to Freelance Writing Direct. I'm your host, Estelle Erasmus, the author of Writing That Gets Noticed, Find Your Voice, Become a Better Storyteller, Get Published, which was named by Poets and Writers a best book for writers. Every week, I speak with novelists, with authors, with writers of every niche to talk about their tips, their tricks, their strategies, and how the sauce is made, including creative advice. I'll talk about essays and articles and share my own experience from 3 decades of publishing. So join me every week and grow your business and build your craft with Freelance Writing Direct. And don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review on iTunes. And follow along on Substack, where I share special clips for subscribers only at estelleserasmus.substack.com. Welcome, everybody, to this episode of Freelance Writing Direct. I'm your host, Estelle Erasmus, and I am so happy to have Michele Filgate with us today. And let me tell you a little bit about Michele. She's the editor of What My Mother and I Don't Talk About and What My Father and I Don't Talk About, which is her latest. Her writing has appeared in Longreads, Poets and Writers, The Washington Post, Los Angeles Times, The Boston Globe, The Paris Review Daily, Tin House, Gulf Coast, Oprah Daily, and many other publications. She received her MFA in fiction from NYU, where she was the recipient of the Stein Fellowship. She teaches creative writing at the New School. Welcome, Michele.
Thank you so much for having me.
So we recently saw each other very briefly at the Open Secrets live conference, and you were on a panel and I was on a panel, and it was great to see you there. And we'd already had our podcast taping date set. So this is wonderful. I read your book. I mean, it's so interesting because What My Mother and I Don't Talk About came out in 2019. And What My Father and I Don't Talk About came out in 2025, just recently. And so there's a 6-year span in between one book and the other. So with the 6 years, what has changed in your life and what made you think now's the time?
That's a great question. So much has changed. My life is completely transformed from how it was when my first anthology came out. And I think that's the case for so many people ever since COVID, that a lot of people have had like big transformations in their lives. For me, I went through a lot of grief in my family. A month before What My Mother and I Don't Talk About came out in 2019, my uncle passed away. And not long after that, a few months after that, my grandmother passed away, who was one of the most important people in my life. And so it was one of the best professional years of my life and one of the hardest personal years with all of that loss in my family. And then during COVID, I went through a big breakup and I was single for a while. And then I met the love of my life and got married. And so I'm now a stepmom to 2 wonderful boys. So my life just looks very different than it did when that first anthology came out. And honestly, working on this book about fathers, it was really such an inspiration to see my husband as the wonderful dad that he is, to see him with his kids was definitely something that really inspired me as I was working on editing this collection. But I feel like I always knew this father book was going to come along, because when I was on tour for the first book, and also after the book went viral a few times on TikTok, there were 2 viral TikToks, one with 1 million views and one with 5 million views. So in those comments on those social media posts, but also when I was on tour for the first book, I kept hearing from people saying how much they connected to the first book and how desperately they were in need of a book about dads and that they really wanted that companion book. So it felt like a natural fit to work on this new anthology. And I asked two of the contributors from the first book to be in this book. So Naomi Munavira and Dylan Landis both wrote about their moms in the first book, and they're in this new collection. But everyone else, aside from myself, I was also obviously in the first book, but everyone else, all the other contributors were not in that first book. So it was such a wonderful experience to work with a new group of writers as well as a few of the writers from the previous anthology.
I love how honest you're about like the transformation in your life. And
Yeah.
really, as writers, it's important for people to understand that we can have a ton of professional success, but our life still goes on. And if we deal with loss, we have to deal with that and move forward. And sometimes it ends up informing our writing and informing our creative work. But, nobody is immune to whatever happens in life. And so professional success, and this book had huge accolades. And I didn't know about the viral TikToks, but I'm going to look them up now. I'm
Yeah.
definitely curious about that. Was it you speaking or was it other people?
No, so those were some young Gen Z women who made videos about liking the book and they went viral. I have never made a TikTok video, and I have to admit, I was skeptical about TikTok. My younger sister, she's Gen Z, and she kept telling me that TikTok is where a lot of young readers are discovering books. And I was kind of stubborn about it and thought that it was only more for like romantasy and young adult books. But it turns out that there's a wide readership on TikTok, book talk as they call it. And there are people there hungry to find out about new books. And so the book went viral. And this is why I always tell people there's a long shelf life for books, because when the first anthology came out, it had a lot of critical acclaim and it did well. But it really wasn't until these viral TikToks that came out a few years after the book came out that the book really like took off. So you never know when your book is going to resonate with readers. And this is why, I teach writing. And I always tell my students that, you really never know the shelf life of a book. In the literary world, there's a lot of emphasis on the first couple of months of when the book comes out is when the publicity blast has to be, and that's when people will look at your book. But really, a book can resonate with people long past that initial pub date.
Absolutely. I'm so glad you're saying that because it's so true. I mean, I just did a TEDx talk that's based on the premises that I teach in my book, Writing That Gets Noticed. And that was 2023. And so now we're in 2025. And TikTok and social media has been such a boon for writers because it's like the backlist babies, keep it going. And I'm so glad that another writing teacher is saying that because it's important for people to not feel like if they're not out of the starting gate, like, a horse at the races, that they've lost, that all is lost. There's
Absolutely.
always something.
Absolutely, because I think there is this emphasis on like, oh, if you don't get like reviewed in all the big places and if you don't get these certain media hits that you need, that there's no chance. And that is not true at all. And in fact, the landscape has changed so much, even from 2019 when my first book came out. There are not as many places that are reviewing books anymore in traditional media. I spent a long time as a book critic and I was on the board of the National Book Critics Circle. And, the landscape for that has changed so much. There aren't as many places with that review books anymore, which is, a very depressing thought for writers and for readers. It's not the same as it was in 2019 for promoting a book, even. But that's why I'm so grateful for when the book finds its readers any way it can through podcasts like this, through bookstore visits, through book festivals, through social media. And that's so important.
Well, I love that, you're keeping the brand going in a
Yes,
way, right?
yes.
And this came at a really important time for me too. I lost my beloved father due to advanced Alzheimer's in March. And,
So sorry for your
this
loss.
really hit home for me with the stories. I had a very good relationship with him, but
Mhm.
there's always, dramas in every family. And for the people who had the good relationships with their dads, and even if it was fraught, it just really was important to me to be able to read these stories and feel connected. And I know you have a good relationship with your dad,
Yeah.
and you had a bit of a fraught relationship with your mom because of your stepdad that you talk about. And everyone should read both books as companion pieces.
I wanted to approach a bunch of new writers as well. So that's why we have the list of contributors that we do. And it's a fantastic list of writers. And to me, what was really important was that the book, just like the first anthology, have a wide spectrum of experiences and not just be about one note kind of thing, or of like a bunch of essays about people who were not close to their dad or who are close to their dad. I wanted a mix of experiences and backgrounds and identities and geographical locations too. So as an anthology editor, that was what I was thinking about as I was putting these pieces together.
So that's really interesting because Naomi Munawira, his legacy, My Inheritance, it's kind of a continuation on a little different level of what she talked about her parents' arranged marriage in your first book. And
Mhm.
so it's kind of like talking about it more from the dad's perspective in this one, which
Exactly.
is really interesting. And it definitely, that's why it's so important to be able to read both books, I think. It's really fascinating. And
Yeah.
so you have some people in there who have been guests on my podcast, writers that I hugely admire. Kelly McMasters, who wrote a piece about the lush language of the natural world. And I love she starts her first sentence, "My father speaks in plant."
Yes.
And
So
that
great.
just brings it, you know what you're going to be reading about. And it's fascinating and it ties right in with her brand.
Yes, absolutely. I know The Leaving Season, her most recent book, is one of my favorite books of recent years. She's an incredible writer. I was so happy to have her contribute a piece to this book.
It's fabulous. And then Joanna Rakoff, who wrote a storybook, Childhood. I love that piece, all
Oh, it's
about
fantastic.
the stories that family tell that you think is one way, and then you find out it's a complete different way without giving it away. And she's been on the podcast as well. And there are just so many interesting perspectives. Let's say people are thinking of doing anthologies. What do they need to really start with? A good idea, obviously.
Good idea is the key thing. I think it helps. This isn't always necessarily the case, but what led to my first book deal was that I wrote a piece that went viral for Longreads. The title of the essay was What My Mother and I Don't Talk About. And when that essay went viral, it went viral when the Me Too movement was taking off in 2017. And part of the reason that it went viral was the content of the piece. But also, I realized people were really connected to the title itself. And I heard from so many people who were saying, I have something I can't talk about with my mom. And I quickly realized it was a great writing prompt. That's all thanks to Sari Botten, who was my editor at Longreads, who ended up writing an essay for the first book. But Sari, when she accepted my piece, I originally wanted to call it Lacuna, and that was the poetic title that I thought was the perfect description of the gaps in my relationship with my mom. And she said, Michelle, no one is ever going to click on that. Like for the internet, you need a headline that will make readers click on the piece and see what it's about. So I came up with a list of titles, and What My Mother and I Don't Talk About was one of them. And we went with that one. So I think having a really good title helps, believe it or not. And also publishing a piece ahead of time that has some traction so that when you're putting a proposal together to sell something, you can say, as you can see, I've already published a piece in this publication that has resonated with readers. And another important thing, and I know this word is kind of can be an ugly word in thinking about being an artist, we often don't want to think about the marketing side of things, but the idea of having a platform for yourself. So, in my case, I had spent years as a bookseller. I ran events at different indie bookstores, first in New Hampshire, then in the city. And after that, I was on the board of the National Book Critics Circle. I did a lot of interviews and author profiles. So, in my many years of either running events or writing about books or interviewing authors, I had built a very wide network of people I knew and could reach out to and could ask if they want to contribute to the anthology. And that really helps too, is already having kind of an established record in the literary world of, hey, I'm a working writer. I've done these things. I really want you to be part of this project. I'm not saying that you need to have that in order to publish an anthology, but when I think of several of the most successful anthologies in recent years, that often is a common denominator. For instance, Sari Botten, who I already mentioned, she has edited several anthologies before her memoir and essays came out. And they're, about goodbye to all that, about writers in honor of that famous Joan Didion essay on loving and leaving New York. And Sari has built a name for herself for many years working as a writer and editor. So that absolutely helped her with getting the writers she got for those two anthologies. So yeah, I would say that it's really important to be like part of the literary world. And I also like to think of it as being like a literary citizen. What are you doing to help promote other people's work? What's most important is thinking of yourself as someone who is helping to spread the word about other writers and not just acting as a billboard for your own writing career. So that's what I mean by a literary citizen, someone who is, plugged into the world of books somehow and actively reading contemporary writers and sharing their work on your social media or with friends, doing things like your podcast that you have, for instance. For many years, I ran a panel called Red Ink for women writers. It started out originally at Book Court, which no longer exists, but then it moved to Powerhouse Bookstore, and then it moved to Books Are Magic. And that was a project that was near and dear to my heart. And I created it because I felt like there was a need for panel discussions made up of women writers discussing different topics. So if you see a lack of something in the literary world, build it yourself, right? And things like that can help with also putting together an anthology, believe it or not.
That's wonderful advice. And I always say, I tell my students, platform is really who is going to want to read your stuff, who is
Yeah,
going to want to share your stuff.
yeah,
That's what platform is. It's like, what are the places that people want to see you, that you're connecting with, that you can then say, I'm a part of this group, I'm a part of that group. And today, it's not so much associations. It used to be like, really, elite associations and organizations. It's more in the workaday literary world. Are there groups? Are there places that you go to? Even places that have regular speakers, like different places in the city, even like New York City, right?
right. If you are expecting people to come support an anthology that you're putting together, then you better be going to events at local indie bookstores and showing up to support other writers when they have books coming out. As you know, it's part of that literary citizenship, right?
One of the things that I've seen, and several people are doing it, and I think it's a fantastic tool to use, and I plan to use it more and more, is they are calling out individual bookstores in social media for having an author speak, for sharing someone's book. And I think it's a great way because these independent bookstores, I'm not talking the big chains, I'm
Right.
talking the indies, they love getting the publicity. It
Yeah.
supports them, it supports their business, and then they in turn continue supporting the writer. So that's one way to also look at platform. Who are you supporting in the industry that's supporting you?
Absolutely. And I'm all about the indie bookstores. They're near and dear to my heart. So,
Right. And you and Kelly come from that world,
yes.
right? Kelly
Yeah.
came from that world as
Yeah.
well.
Yeah.
And she had a bookstore and she talks about it in the Leaving season
Right.
as well.
Exactly. And had a column about it for the Paris Reviews Daily for a while too.
So
Yeah.
you used a different framework from Thomas Q. Maureen. On page 153 of the book, he uses the operation framework of the operation game. I remember that from childhood. And he talks about, the ankle bone connected to the knee bone, and then describing things about his dad. And then he went into wretched ankle, Charlie horse. Did he present it this way, or was he like, hey, I have an idea. I want to do a hermit crab essay format. Would that work for you? Like, how did that all come about?
He did not pitch a hermit crab essay idea to me. It came in like that once he wrote it. And I think landing on that structure really cracked it open for him. And so when he sent it to me, I absolutely loved it. I thought that it was such a brilliant idea for structuring that particular piece. And Tomas's background is, he's written prose as well, but he's a poet. And so I felt like it really fit for the particular essay that he wrote for this book. I love hermit crab essays and I love more experimental forms and structures. So it was exciting to me to see that come in and it really worked. I loved it.
Did you decide on a similar format to the previous book, like the same amount of chapters? I didn't count them all, but is that like something similar?
So there's one more contributor in this book. The first book was 15, this is 16. But in terms of how I wanted to put the book together, yes, I wanted it to kind of flow in a certain way. And I've talked about this in other interviews, but it's kind of like when you're editing an anthology, thinking of it like a mixtape too, to kind of capture a certain mood, right? So you don't want a bunch of essays that are very similar, like all bunched together. And all of these essays are different in their own ways, but it's really interesting how stuff can echo each other or speak to each other or mirror each other as you're starting to put the anthology together. You notice these things. I knew I wanted to have around the same amount of people as the first book. And this is a longer book than the first book. I feel like, on a whole, a lot of people wrote longer essays for this book.
Yeah, I did notice that it was a bit longer. And has it changed your relationship with your parents having the book out?
Oh, I'm in a much better place with my mother. And also for this book, writing about my father, it has been a really wonderful thing to do. My dad is this goofy, fun-loving kind of guy. And so it was hard to write about someone you're close with and capture them on the page. And it was also hard to write about grief because the essay also deals with grief, with my Uncle Jim taking his own life in 2019 and how my father kind of tried to fill in the major hole in his life once Uncle Jim died by calling his adult daughters all the time. And so when I first started writing the essay, I was really leaning into the grief part a lot, and it kind of wasn't working. And I still have that in the finished essay, but I also really wanted to focus on the love and the ways in which we both try to hold on to memories through objects that we hold on to. And it also deals with our shared ADHD, which is an interesting thing.
I read a lot, obviously, for the podcast, my work, and I liked that there wasn't an undercurrent of anger
Mhm.
behind the anthology. I find some things, and I'm not going to name anything, but some things have so much anger behind it that it's hard to separate the stories from the emotion, and not everybody feels angry. So I
Yeah.
think the way that it was edited, to your credit, gave a lot of space for readers to feel whatever they're going to feel from the individual. And I know that that is a conscious strategy on your part as the editor.
Yeah, I think most readers are going to feel like the full spectrum of emotions as they move throughout the book because there are some pieces in here that are heartbreaking. There are some pieces in there that do have some anger in them, and rightly so, for various reasons involving the father that they're writing about. But there's a lot of love in this book too, and a lot of tenderness. And so I really just admire all of the contributors in this book for being so vulnerable on the page. The subtitle of both of these anthologies. The first one is 15 Writers Break the Silence, and this one is 16 Writers Break the Silence. And there are all kinds of silences that we're breaking when we write about our own lived experience, but particularly about our family members. And I think that as a whole, the mission of both of these books is to break the silence. And to do so in a way that opens up conversations for the readers as they're moving through this. One of my favorite things is I've seen for the first book, like some moms and daughters bought the book together and then had book group together to discuss. And I love hearing about how this book has opened up conversations between parents and their adult children. And I'm hoping the same thing will happen with the father anthology. I have a feeling it will. And it's interesting because I feel like traditionally in our society, we don't put the same expectation on dads to be the one that we go to talk about things as we do with moms. But as this book shows, there are all kinds of dads, and there are dads who show their love through actions rather than words, right? Like Maurice Carlos Ruffin's essay in this book is a demonstration of that, of a dad who really wasn't someone who he had these deep conversations with, but who was always there for him and whose actions spoke volumes. So I think that we are also seeing more in our society, like a change in the kinds of stories we see about fatherhood. We're seeing more dads who are shown as vulnerable human beings and not just like this traditional masculinity where you can't reveal your emotions. We're seeing more stay-at-home fathers. So we're seeing this changing view of fatherhood too. And I'm hoping that this book will open up conversations in that as well, of there are ways in which fathers can be vulnerable and open with their kids. So
I like that you're putting it that way because in the book you address in one of the essays, several of them, aging and how fathers can look like these superstars to us when we're younger, like impenetrable. And then as they get older and perhaps infirm, I mean, in the case of my dad, he was like a superstar in my eyes and he could do no wrong. I mean, he was the provider, the protector. And as he got older and the Alzheimer's took him over, it became a whole different way of looking at him and the vulnerability. And so when the first book came out, I don't even think there were that many conversations about fathers and their vulnerabilities and showing it in literature. And maybe part of it is when the Me Too reckoning happened, it brought out those stories out of the silence. And I love that that's your subhead also.
thank you. Yeah, no, I do think we're just seeing a shift and people are looking at fatherhood in more complex ways now too. And just even thinking about in pop culture, like the movie After Sun. I don't know if you've seen that, but it's this beautiful, stunning movie about a father taking his daughter on vacation. And I don't want to say anything else about it. I don't want to spoil it, but you should
I'll
see
have
it.
to I'll have to look for that. So I was going to ask you, what did you want to happen from this? And obviously you want more conversation to continue. This is your brand right now, right? I mean, is the next one going to be what my siblings and I don't talk about?
People keep asking for the siblings one. If I do another one, it would be siblings because I have siblings. But for now, my main focus is my own writing. So my next book needs to be my own book. I'm saying that on the record in all these interviews so that it happens. Yeah, I need my next book to be my own book. So
Would
that's
it be memoir or would it be
probably essays. I'm working on both fiction and nonfiction. So I got my MFA in fiction at NYU in 2022. So I'm working on a few things right now, and we shall see which one will be the first book. But yeah, I'm excited to publish my own stuff too.
this is wonderful. I was so happy to talk to you. What my father and I don't talk about. And of course, also make sure to read What My Mother and I Don't Talk About. Thank you so much, Michele.
Thank you, Estelle.
Follow me at estelleserasmus.com on my website and on social media, which is Instagram, TikTok, and Twitter at Estelle S. Erasmus. And we're now on YouTube for Freelance Writing Direct. Follow along, and soon everyone will be reading what you're writing.